I did get to experience once. I actually was doing calculations. It was probably at least 20 years ago. I was at a scout camp, and it was a Southern California camp that I had been looking forward to being at. Our troop went there only rarely, but it was better than the camps we would go to here in Arizona. And shortly after our arrival, probably 2-3 hours, once we had settled in, our charter buses had driven off into the sunset, and we had unpacked our bags. Actually, no, we hadn't unpacked our bags. So we had been there just long enough to get settled in and do some tests and get acquainted with the camp, when this guy comes running through the camp, screaming, "There's a fire!" And he keeps going, and he goes over to the headquarters of the camp. And the rest of us are thinking, is this for real? Well, another 2 hours later, the entire camp is evacuated, except for the staff, who have been making sure to help everyone get out, and us, who were from Arizona, who had no vehicles. There was a forest fire nearby. It was very nearby. We ended up having to line up and kind of divide up our whole troop. I don't know how many, there was probably 40 of us, and we had to divide up amongst all the staff members who had their personal vehicles. So we had to cram ourselves and organize ourselves to fit into all their cars. Before we even left, I remember the whole sky was covered in smoke, and you were starting to see some ash come down. It was so thick and so dark that the sun had become like a little red moon, obscured in the sky. At the end of the day, we ended up escaping that day, all just fine. As we're driving out, we see fire. Everything was fine. 2 days later, we had to get another charter bus and head back to Phoenix. But a memory stays with me about how destructive fire is. Jesus speaks of a destructive fire. When he says, I have come to cast fire set the earth on fire, we might, I think it's not a bad thing to think of, okay, he wants to set our hearts afire, wants to set us on fire. But he's describing a destruction. And then he goes on to talk about division, and the worst kind of division amongst father and son, mother and daughter, daughter and mother, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. He's just very clear. There's going to be division amongst those who are closest to you. He says, my anguish, how great is my anguish until my baptism is accomplished. There's a baptism which I must be baptized by. That's how he talks about his passion and death. So Jesus is anticipating destruction and division, which you and I are very well acquainted with this fire. He's anticipating it. He almost sounds eager. How great is my anguish until it's accomplished. Like he's anxious and eager for this to happen. So amongst many, many things that we could talk about here, I want to highlight the virtue that really helps us persevere in the midst of division and destruction. Because Jesus is telling us it's coming, and we know it's here. So what do? I propose to you to consider the virtue of fortitude. The virtue of fortitude. What's interesting about this virtue is that it's actually the in-between fear and daring or recklessness. Fortitude is simply defined as the ability to choose, is the virtue, the stable disposition of choosing what I know is right, despite the obstacles. And not to let fear keep me from doing what I know is right, and not to let my sense of being brave and bold make me be reckless. Fortitude. How do we manage fear and the daring? Well, first of all, we need Jesus' grace to help us recognize what are our fears, to name them. Fears can come in a very subtle way. For example, when you have outbursts in the family of anger, when people start screaming at each other, what's going on? I remember there are many times when I have a wonderful dad, but he would get angry. He would lose his cool sometimes. For example, if I slammed the door, he would get really angry. Why? There's a fear that I'm going to break something and he's going to have to pay for it. There's a fear that his son is going to become reckless and make a mess of things that are more delicate than doors. Have you ever thought that? That underneath anger, there's always a fear. Spouses start screaming at each other, usually because there's a fear that their spouse is about to make a terrible decision for their marriage, for their kids, for their finances. Fear underlies most outbursts of anger. There's anger in politics. Why? Because we're afraid our country will be ruined, that there will be injustice. There's fear and anger in the church because we're afraid that in the church we're going to be falling apart. So fortitude curbs our fears. And instead of allowing fear to lead me into anger, fortitude helps me to still choose the good, to be charitable, loving, patient, and kind in the midst of true fear. Something that helps here to recognize is what's going to help us be fortuitous, practice fortitude in the midst of fear. It's not getting rid of fear. To have no fear, fearlessness in the sense of having no feelings of fear. St. Thomas Aquinas, when he's described, this is where I'm taking, St. Thomas talks about a very clear definition of the virtue of fortitude. And he says, fortitude is against fearlessness, because to be without fear is, and the fancy word he uses, stupid. There are things to be fearful of. Jesus, he says, how great is my anguish until this baptism is accomplished. St. Paul talks about he invites us to consider how Jesus endured such opposition from sinners in order that you and I may not grow weary and lose heart. Jesus, he endured the cross, despising its shame. Was he fearless? Did he have no fear of the cross? Or do you think Jesus was afraid of the cross? Yes. Remember the Garden of Gethsemane? He's shaking. He's so anxious. He's sweating blood. There's so much tension because he knows exactly how intense this is going to be. And he cries out, Father, let this chalice pass from me, but not my will, but yours. He was afraid, but he exhibited tremendous fortitude to choose what he knew was good. So fortitude is not negating fear, but choosing the good despite it, to overcome the obstacle of fear. What can help us do that is what Jesus did on the cross. St. Paul said it was for the sake of the joy that lay before him that he endured the cross. Friends, this is a mystery of faith, but Jesus, the evil in the world, there's lots of evil, there's lots of destruction and division, and God is allowing it. Do you think he can bring good out of it? Which evils can he bring good out of? Any evil God permits, it's because he can bring some good out of it. So back to fire. Fire is a great destruction. So I did a little bit of research, and the California Department of Forestry and Fire Prevention lists 4 benefits of fire. Forest fires clean the forest floor, which can prevent other worse fires. cleaning the forest floor of debris and stuff that make it difficult for other animals to make a home. So it cleans the forest floor. It provides a habitat, not only by clearing the clutter, but it provides more habitat for creatures by getting rid of the small plants that suck up water that the other animals need. It also provides a habitat. The third thing is that because fires will kill disease. And get this, the California Department of Forestry says that more trees die by disease than by fire. So the fire kills a lot of diseases, which is really good for life. And the fourth thing it lists is, as a benefit of fires, is that it allows for new generations. That there are even certain species of trees in those areas that have fireproof, fire-resistant bark, and they need the intense heat of a fire in order for them to expand and release their seed so that more trees can grow. Friends, what I'm proposing to you is that there is a natural thing that causes destruction called fire, but that good can come out of it, out of such destruction. And if that's true on some natural level, even though it's not, obviously there's a lot of evil that comes out of fires. But if there can also be some benefits, how much more if our omnipotent God is allowing evil, division, and destruction in our world? How much more can he actually bring good out of it? The cross, we hold up the cross real high, not because that's anything good. This is an evil thing. This is like holding up the guillotine or the electric chair, the instrument of capital punishment. But we hold it up because that evil became the fountain of mercy. These wounds on Jesus' hands and feet and his side are the means by which we receive the sacraments. This brings us salvation. It's the bridge to God over the chasm of sin. So let us practice fortitude, curbing our fear, but also recognize that we need the grace of fortitude, this virtue. We need to practice this, exercise it, to also moderate our sense of daring. Being bold and courageous in the midst of challenges is important, but you have to be discerning. We all want to be brave and bold, but fortitude is a virtue that helps us moderate that boldness so that it doesn't become reckless and more destructive. We should never respond to evil with more evil. And when we're too bold and daring, we can get a little blinded by that. We need to ask Jesus to help us know when it is that we need to be bold and know when it is that we need to allow our fear, God-given fear, to protect us or to protect others. Fortitude is that virtue by which we curb fear and moderate daring. Fortitude overcomes allows us to feel fear and still choose the good. To be bold, but with moderation, according to God's will. But friends, at the end of the day, we're about God's will. We're Christians. We're not talking about just a natural virtue. We're invited to take on the virtue of Christ. St. Paul says, "Let us rid ourselves of every burden and sin that clings to us." This is what evil in our times can do for us, because the greatest good, or what sin takes us away from, is the virtue of faith, hope, and love. So the fires of evil in our world can help allow greater faith to grow, because sometimes our faith is actually superficial. Our hope is that nothing bad will happen, and then bad things happen and we lose our faith. No, we need better faith than that. That's one of the benefits of fires of division and destruction in our time, to allow us to foster faith, hope. Allow evil to burn away every burden of sin that clings to us. And, he says, St. Paul in our second reading, persevere in running the race that lies before us while keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus. Fixed on Jesus, because he is the leader and perfecter of faith. Jesus told us to love our enemies, pray for those who persecute us. And friends, that's really impossible. I can't do it. So I know I have to pray regularly, Jesus, give me your love for that person. I can't. My natural love is too small. I need Jesus. Jesus, I need you to put in my heart your love for that person. And maybe that person that I hate the most is myself. Jesus, help me to see myself the way you see me. So, in the midst of fear and our desire to be bold and brave, Jesus, give me your fortitude. Fill me with your fortitude, that I might discern what is the Father's will for me, that I may not allow any obstacles to the Father's will to keep me from choosing what's good at all times. Friends, the fruit of that fortitude is joy. Joy in the midst of the fires of this world, because we will begin to recognize God's closeness to us.